Welcome. My name is Joel Rosenthal. I'm president of the Carnegie Council for Ethics and International Affairs, and we're delighted that you're joining us here in person and also online. Today, we're meeting to launch the first in a series of conversations called Unlocking Cooperation. Now, this theme may strike some of you as counter-programming to what you're seeing and hearing in the news, and this is precisely our intention. Unlocking is a suggestive term. It implies that success is within our reach if we can only find the key. As violence continues in Europe and the Middle East, and as positive collective action on urgent global scale issues seems out of reach, we believe it is more important than ever to discover and deliver new forms of international cooperation. Recent surveys show a significant uptick in zero-sum thinking, both domestically and internationally, especially among young people. Zero-sum is just another way of saying, my gain is your loss. While we understand and respect the experiences that lead to this point of view, we believe zero-sum thinking is not only insufficient, but short-sighted. In contrast, we believe there are shared values and shared interests that can serve as the basis for effective and inclusive forms of cooperation. We merely need to activate them. Win-win as opposed to zero-sum is not just wishful thinking. Non-zero solutions are realistic, pragmatic, and within our grasp. In his famous peace speech of June 1963, John F. Kennedy reminded us that, and I'm going to quote, "No problem of human destiny is beyond human beings. Man's reason and spirit have often solved the seemingly unsolvable, and we believe they can do it again." To continue the quote, "I'm not referring to the absolute infinite concept of peace and goodwill, which some fantasies and fanatics dream. I do not deny the value of hopes and dreams, but we merely invite discouragement and incredulity by making that our only and immediate goal. Let's focus instead on a more practical, more attainable peace, based not on a sudden revolution in human nature, but on a gradual evolution in human institutions, on a series of concrete actions and effective agreements which are in the interests of all concerned." End of quote. I think many of us would agree with what Kennedy said back in 1963. Human problems have human solutions, and our problems are not so much technical as they are ethical and behavioral. We trust that this meeting today and all the meetings in this series will help spark new dialogues and new actions emphasizing our common humanity. We have with us 4 exemplars to help us investigate the keys to unlocking greater cooperation. And so my thanks to our exceptional speakers for joining us. With that, I'm going to turn over the floor to Ramu Damodaran, our senior advisor to the UN University of Peace. Along with Kevin Maloney, Ramu has been both the architect and engineer of this program. So thank you, Ramu, for everything. Thanks to the panelists. Thanks you all for coming. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joel. Is my voice carrying remotely? So, okay. I don't know if any of you have been to a one-man show downtown by Lawrence Fishburne. I know that Archie has. And in one of the lines, Lawrence Fishburne said, "The one thing I have been blessed with is a voice." I have a lot in common with Lawrence Fishburne, but that's not one thing. I'm very grateful for this opportunity, Joel, that you and Kevin have given us to talk about the summit of the future, and in particular, the idea of using it as a means to truly unlock, as you said, Joel, not a zero-sum game, but a win-win game. And we are blessed by the panel we have today with us. We're going to go in typical American first name style, alphabetically, beginning with Archie Young, the UK ambassador to the UN General Assembly. And then we have Dima, Nima Al-Khatib, who is director of the Office on South-South Cooperation at the United Nations, and Fernando Marani, who is the program director at the Center for International Cooperation at New York University. And the idea of our conversation, since we really have a very limited time with us, is to begin by asking each of our panelists to frame one of their areas of experience or expertise in the context of unlocking cooperation and the summit. And then the second half, ask each of them to think of one or two points that the other two panelists may have made with which they either agree or disagree, or something that sparked a sense of curiosity or interest, and then take it on to a conversation with all of you. Now, we've talked about the Summit for the Future. Central to all this, as is inevitable at the United Nations, is the promised document. And we keep on trying to find new words to call these documents. This time we've come up with the word pact. So we're going to have a pact for the future. And when I look at what the General Assembly said, that it is to realize the vision of a multilateral system that is more effective, more trusted, more inclusive, and better equipped with the challenges, opportunities, and capacities of the present and the future. A new beginning in international cooperation with a new approach. Something we could have said rather more briefly by saying it's about ethics in international affairs. So thank you all for joining us, and let me begin by asking Archie to focus on one particular area of his expertise, by no means the only one, climate. And how does climate change, which has really been over the past several years, a source of division and a lack of cooperation between the global north and the global south, what promise has it to help unlock cooperation?
Thank you very much, Ramu, and it's a pleasure to be here with such distinguished colleagues. Thank you for the invitation as well. I'm really pleased that we're focusing on climate as an exemplar of cooperation, given how critical cooperation is to the extraordinary challenge that we face in tackling climate change, both in terms of preventing its worst impacts and dealing with its impacts, and also doing so in a way which enables genuine sustainable development and the uplifting of the most vulnerable around the world. It is in many ways a classic case of cooperation, given that given the levels of interaction that are required, but also given questions about agency and the fact that the people who have least contributed to the problem are the people who are suffering the most. And therefore that need for mechanisms and tools which are inclusive, which genuinely build on and benefit from the insights that are possible all around the world, and bring people together in a common direction. I would challenge your question a bit, because you framed it in a very negative way about collaboration. And I actually think that there are incredibly positive examples of collaboration in tackling climate change. Yes, it's very clear from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the Global Stocktake that we are behind. Collectively, we are behind. There is insufficient action on pretty much all of the key indicators. But that does not mean that cooperation isn't happening. That does not mean that there aren't really positive examples to build on. And I'll just, if it's helpful, just to give a sense of some of those areas of cooperation. So I think, there's the cooperation which is technical, there's financial, there's political, there's diplomatic cooperation. There's cooperation in terms of between states, there's North-South cooperation, South-South. I'm trying to look for the right geometry in terms of actually the incredible web or range of networks of cooperation that are actually happening. The image that came to mind was a pinball cooperation, because it's just spinning and whizzing between all of these different nodal points, but that almost feels too random. And actually, there is much more of a direction to it, which I think is a positive direction. And then there's the cooperation depending on the different issues, the cooperation to reduce emissions, to build adaptive capacity, to get the finance flowing, to address the losses and damages from climate change, build the technical cooperation and the capacity building. And there are both formal mechanisms as well as informal mechanisms. And don't worry, I'm not going to do a list of all the UK's programming. I don't think that would be appropriate for this audience. But there are some really good examples of where that cooperation is happening. One example on the diplomatic side that I think is actually just a really interesting case is a very informal grouping called the Cartagena Dialogue. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Cartagena Dialogue, this was formed many years ago by my mentor and a dear friend who sadly passed away not so long ago, Pete Betts, and some other colleagues, where they identified that in the negotiations, people were stuck in their groups and people were not listening to each other and people were not identifying where the opportunities for cooperation really were. So they brought together this grouping of progressive countries to actually spend time together, invest in each other as human beings and understand the interests that lay behind the positions. And it's through that we were able to work together, drive towards the Paris Agreement, the Glasgow Climate Pact, the Katowice package, all of these different agreements and decisions that we've been able to make since. Just a couple more points if I can. One is to bring it back to the Summit of the Future. And in that broader sense of cooperation. So, like I said, climate change is such a classic case for cooperation. It's even in the convention, the UN Convention on Climate Change says, given the global nature of climate change, it calls for the widest possible cooperation between all countries. And the summit should be the manifestation of that as well. It should be this opportunity for the whole world to come together, despite the divisions, and set a direction that actually resonates with people. So we need to, and I say this myself, we need to watch ourselves for UN language. We need to be able to create both a summit and a pact which is meaningful. We need to use it as a crucible for areas where we can work together, not just throwing in all the areas on which we disagree. And we need to also be respectful of different mandates. So yes, climate change absolutely needs to feature in the Pact for the Future and the summit. But also we've got to respect the fact that there are ongoing processes, UN processes, state processes, multi-sectoral processes, very informal processes, which actually all deserve their own space and their own movement. And I want to make sure that as the summit sets that clear direction, all of these other issues, which are very relevant, can see themselves in it, but we don't end up in a competition as to which issue is more important for the future. And then the last thing I'll say is you talked about the ethics side of this, and I think inclusive cooperation was mentioned. And this came through really strongly last year in the UK's International Development White Paper, where it makes the point of wanting to frame our development cooperation in terms of mutual respect and partnership, and avoid development being done to others. And what I'm interested to hear from colleagues here today is, what does that look like in practice, and how can we really live up to that ambition? Thank you.
Thank you, Archie. You had two remarkable themes there, the idea of the tension, if you will, between a preoccupation with processes and with investing in human beings. And then the idea that you mentioned about inclusive cooperation, which brings me to DEMA, because DEMA, as I mentioned, is looking after the vast portfolio of South-South cooperation. And we think again of these as two monoliths, the South and the North. But what about within the South itself? When you talk about cooperation within the South, and that in a sense, fusing with cooperation with the North, something that could be called triangular cooperation. Is this something that you're exploring?
Thank you, Ramu, and thank you, Joel, for hosting us today, and great discussion. Let me start from where our colleague ended here on the issue of climate change. And climate and cooperation for addressing that is by excellence, as you say, a subject of South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation. And I will delve into that a little bit further. because climate doesn't have any geographic boundaries. This is a topic whereby the implications have to be addressed by the collective. And there should be a sense of accountability, and this is where the countries of the South, which are 80% of the globe, are, you know, shouting out and wanting to address that. And there are some, you know, other countries that are extremely threatened by the implication of climate change, hence the urge, because it's about livelihoods and it's about sustaining life and it's about existence, right? But from there on, you know, as we look into issues such as climate, but other developmental issues, South-South cooperation and the interaction and the collaboration among countries and triangular cooperation have proven to be a very effective way that complements the regular way of doing or supporting development, whether by the multilateral system or through different collaborations with countries. And I do agree, there are so many mechanisms that exist. I mean, and the $1 million question would be, how do you make sure that you connect all of this together and capitalize on it, rather than having to, you know, kind of repeat the same thing? What I wanted to also give few examples about is specifically the triangular cooperation, because triangular cooperation not only is a, you know, driven by southern countries, it's a complement to South-South cooperation. And it's a cooperation modality that brings on board the expertise and the support of different entities, not to mention also countries. And this is where also northern countries can, you know, definitely exercise that support and that collaboration based on this southern-driven demands. Again, I mean, when we talk about South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation, the demand has to be driven from the countries of the South, and according, you know, taking into account their specificities, their context, their culture, their language, the proximity, the name it, right? And what we have seen in the past, you know, I would say decade also, a growing interest and commitment to that modality of South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation. It's been on the rise. We have seen, you know, countries who have been putting policy, I mean, Germany, Japan, have dedicated, for example, policies, frameworks and programs and budgets for this cooperations. Canada, the European Union, Norway, Korea, Spain, Brazil, Chile, Mexico, many other countries do have frameworks, do have that part of their, you know, development cooperation modality, and it has been proven to be extremely effective. Now, for example, in Ibero-America, like we have 121 triangular cooperation initiatives that were carried out only between 2020 and 2021. And this is also, you know, it is expected to be on the rise as we also observe the different dynamics in the, you know, development financing ecosystem, if you will. Right? And next year, there will be a major conference on financing for development. And I do expect, you know, issues of that nature will be definitely deeply discussed. All of the work that relates to South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation is, of course, grounded on this major conference that took place in where we were just talking about it. It comes from Argentina and Buenos Aires, the Buenos Aires Action Plan, which was also kind of recommitted to, let me put it that way, in 2019 through what we call the Buenos Aires Action Plan +40. But I also want to mention one important thing, that since I have been assuming this function 1 year ago now, every major international conference and fora, there is a dedicated call for capitalizing and using South-South and triangular cooperation as a means that complements the traditional or the current development cooperation frameworks. It's also very important to note that we also see emerging countries that are now re-looking and reconsidering the way they are supporting development, and trying to look at it, I mean, and classify it also as triangular cooperation, because whenever technical expertise is also coming into play, this is part of the exchange that takes place. So recently, for example, in January, the third South Summit that took place in Uganda after 20 years has also a major declaration whereby the countries of the South restated what are their development priorities and how important is it to address them in many ways, South-South and triangular cooperation being a key part of it. In February, there was also a major conference that took place in Morocco for the middle-income countries. Again, this was underlined as one of those. Coming up in 2024, the SIDS Conference 4 will be taking place in Barbuda and Antigua, and this is going to set the 10-year action plan for the small island countries. And this is also an opportunity whereby this will be brought to the table. In June, there will be also a dedicated conference which will come up with a new action plan for the landlocked countries, a group of countries that are really suffering from different developmental challenges due to their landlockedness. And this is also going to rely a lot on discussing. We are also partnering with the UN Office of the High Representative on leased and landlocked countries to have a ministerial segment during that conference to actually discuss and delve deeper into how South-South and triangular cooperation can make a difference. We will be using case studies to showcase that process and that phenomenon. Another thing that I also wanted to mention that, monitoring these trends is extremely important, and looking into what is the impact of that and how does it work, and talking about it, advocating for it, raising awareness about it is extremely important. And this is why I really value discussions such as the ones we have today, because it's also speaking to a different audience, and it's also spreading the word about that. We have recently undertaken a study together with a German think tank to look into the impact of triangular cooperation with focus on the Arab region, a region that is also grappling with different developmental issues ranging from, peace-related one, but also agriculture, health, education, name it. And it has really, showed, how much triangular cooperation have been, proving its worth by looking into special initiatives that have been supported by Germany, by Japan, and the like. At the same time, it also highlighted, moving forward, what should one focus on? Advocacy came as one key area, but also the need to monitor, the extent of which the northern countries have been supporting. With the OECD system, sometimes this is not fully captured. There is an intent to increase, looking into that, and that's something that is definitely would be needed, and it will showcase further how much this modality has been effective and has been yielding to its results. There is also another study that was done between OECD and the Islamic Development Bank, also looking into triangular cooperation. Islamic Development Bank being an IFI that not only has South-South cooperation as part of its DNA, but it's also coming up with those packages of support whereby there is engagement of technical support coming whether from the private sector or from other entities. We do have a memorandum of understanding with the Islamic Development Bank, and so on and so forth. So these are important elements to look into. And we as an office, we do have the intention based on a recommendation from the Secretary General to establish a window on triangular cooperation that will be part of our UN fund for South-South cooperation to be able to work with the multilateral system, because we are mandated also to work with the totality of the UN system regionally and on the ground for the sake of supporting the use of this modality and enabling, the establishment of a financial mechanism that will allow. So more to come about this. We will be We have started recently jointly with Portugal, the Permanent Representation Mission, and Islamic Development Bank, a series of discussions around this. And we hope that this year we will be able to operationalize this. So there's much to talk about it. I don't want to take a lot of time, but thank you very much for the question. And we really look forward to continuing these dialogues and making, spread the word about this, because there is definitely a light at the end of the tunnel, and we need to hold on to these mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nima. The impression I got from what you said is that there's always been a certain conscious, not necessarily altruism, but policy choice by individual countries, like the OECD countries, on extending cooperation. And I wondered whether that could be replaced by more architectural norms which unite countries. And I was going to ask Fernando about that. Is it possible to have a global normative system which, in a sense, mandates cooperation and takes it for granted in specific areas?
Thank you, Ramu, and thank you for the invitation. That's a very interesting conversation, very timely as well. And I think we are living in a world where the narrative is that the division and the polarization among nations is growing and growing, and it's very unfortunate type of conversation. I think that we need to ensure that we keep on finding those areas where actually cooperation works and exists, and there is areas of convergence in so many fronts. I'm a lawyer from background, so of course I would love that to set everything on a legal framework. It gets predictability, enforceability. You have always in such a framework ways to solve your disputes in a peaceful manner. So of course I'm a true believer of the importance of setting any type of cooperation on a legal context, on a legal framework. But there are also some downsides to that. I might be honest, processes are long, not only the process of negotiating such a treaties, but also the enforcement, you reach to the moment of agreement, adoption of the text, and then it takes years, some time to bring it into reality. But I think that I will pick up maybe two areas to say, in which topics it makes sense to have such a type of an agreement, and where it had been working, and maybe it's a bit of timing, moment in history. Is this area that there are moments in history that we have achieved higher cooperation? And I will demystify or try to demystify both. So definitely in areas like common public goods, it makes sense to have a legal framework to regulate. It is usually much more effective, and the case that paradigmatic case is the case of the Convention on Law of the Sea. It took 20 years to get there, but it was an instrument that ensured that we were able to use our oceans in a more sustainable manner. We're still benefiting from rules that were put in the early 80s. And again, I cannot deny my lawyer identity, but also my Argentinian identity. So climate, we were raised in the 80s thinking that the ozone layer, we were all going to die of skin cancer in the global south. And it was an achievement of the international community, a treaty that ensured the production of certain gases was prohibited, and now we are living in a world where the ozone layer is not an issue, at least on the newspaper on the top. So there are areas where these really work and work fast. But as I said, it's not always necessary to put it on a legal framework. There are other ways of ensuring cooperation. And as a former diplomat, I think that the UN has a huge play to roll. There are many areas of convergence. You can issue documents that still have power, like what we are expecting on the Pact of the Future, that is not going to be a legal treaty, but it will have the power of being adopted in the framework of the General Assembly with the support of the leaders of the member states. So that's also powerful and gives more flexibility. On the issue of the momentum, I don't like that conversation. We all keep on dreaming that the past was better, and I attend so many panels of 2015 was the best year in international cooperation, and since then we're down. And it's not true. Like a year and a half ago, we adopted a new convention on biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. Huge, complex, difficult topic. A lot of interests overlapping from countries from different sides of the world, and we still made it. And some people say the early 2000s was great for international criminal cooperation, and the Rome Statute is the best that we had, and since then, nothing else. And it's not true. 7 months ago, the Ljubljana, the Hague Treaty on Mutual Legal Assistance, how to ensure that countries could cooperate on the investigation and prosecution of crimes against humanity. That was adopted, as I said, 7 months ago. So it's not that nothing happens or that you only have this momentum. It's just you need to keep on working. And that's brings me to the probably what I see like the big challenge from here until September, and what these examples like the BBNJ, the case or MLA, to ensure that we have meaningful international cooperation, you need to ensure that first, everyone is ready to sit on the table and speak. And when we say inclusivity, it's not just giving a chair to someone. It's to ensure that that person also have the knowledge and the capacity to attend those conversations. And when we say the knowledge is capacity building, and we say the capacity to be on the table is funds for people to come to New York or wherever those conversations are happening. Again, coming from far away, and I always felt like sorry for my colleagues from Australia, coming to a meeting in Europe, coming to a meeting in New York, it's expensive, it's far, it's difficult. Some countries in the Global South, their Minister of Foreign Affairs are tiny. So to ensure that they have the right expert to attend these conversations that are difficult is not easy. It's not just a question of overnight. In the case of BBNJ, it took almost 15 years to get there, but it was a lot of effort from countries from the Global North to ensure that the countries from the Global South, including small island developed states, they were ready to be on the table. They were ready to their interest, but also to engage in this multilateral conversation. So give everybody the resources to be on the table. And the second one, coming closer to the discussion of today on the ethics, is have empathy. Understand where the other is coming from. Understand what is the background of that person, of that country. Don't fall into the usual misunderstandings. Be ready to try to get a different angle to the conversation. And that is not always easy. We all have our own cultural background, our own history, and when we sit with the table, you think that the other person considers you your enemy, and just get rid of all those prejudices and try to be open to listen to things from a different angle. And in this, just to go back what Dima was saying, triangular cooperation for me is one of the best tools to ensure that, because it's easier on certain areas that are super sensitive if the conversations come from a South-South angle. But unfortunately, not all the countries in the South have the financial capacity to ensure that conversation. So I invite everyone, to explore those opportunities. They're so much exciting and bring so really good results on the ground.
Thank you, Fernando. And I'm very grateful for brought in the personal element of negotiation, the whole idea of going to a negotiating forum, the effort it takes, and the investment. I think I'll have to restructure the second part a little. It's 9:07. Could I ask each of you in 1 minute to share with us a thought that you picked up from the other two panelists and what it meant to you? Archie?
Thank you. There's so much to pick up on from what you both said. I really liked what Fernando was saying just then in terms of the human connections. And since that was the last thing that was said, that's what I'll pick up on. And I mentioned the Cartagena dialogue, but I think I'm really interested how so often in multilateral fora, we're on transmit. And actually too many of our processes, people turn up, press the microphone, transmit a statement, and then leave. So I'm interested in how we can create the right spaces. And people sometimes, they're skeptical about, lunches and dinners, understandably so. But actually, it's often in those human moments that you have an opportunity to really ask people what are, like I said before, the interests that underlie their positions, but also where you can find the points of common direction. And you can identify, right, well, actually, these are the points in which we disagree, but actually we might agree on these elements. How can we work on those? And if I link that to where we started on the Summit of the Future, we are currently at the stage whereby every country is engaging in, currently it's still a zero draft compilation text, 242 pages, which is brilliant for transparency. You can see what every single country asked to be added into the zero draft, but it also makes for a very difficult negotiating room because lots of people are talking past each other. Everybody feels as though this is a negotiation that's going to run for months. Why would I give up on my asks now, right? People are playing an end game already. And actually, this is the summit of the future. This is the future that it is in our hands. And so I'm really interested in how we can actually use those human connections to craft something that is, like I said, meaningful, that focuses on the issues that people care most about, and what kind of multilateral environment, space, conversations would actually enable that to happen.
Thank you. Thanks, Archie. Dima?
Thank you. Also picking up from where
Sorry,
you
can I
left.
just add, that wasn't in any way critical of the co-facilitators, who I think are doing an incredible job in very difficult circumstances, just to make that clear. Sorry, Dima.
No problem. But I mean, going back to the issue of dialogue and the interactions and the pact of the future, and here where, I mean, and I know that there's a lot of discussions going on, and I want to go back to a few points. One is to really, I mean, it's a call also to capitalize on what exists, but also as we look into the pact of the future, is also to think about how do we, what is provided for its implementation, the means of implementation is extremely important, because one thing is to come up with a document that is inclusive of everything. And another thing is, you know, how do you want to make it happen? And how do we want to track this implementation? Goes back to multilateral system whereby they can play a major role in this. So that's one thing that I would like to say. But the other thing is going back to the countries of the South. I mean, also let's keep in mind that there is also an amplified voice nowadays for the countries of the South. They are now part of the G20. They are now part of the BRICS. There is an amplified voice. How can, you know, this amplified voice also be the voice of, you know, trying to also make it happen for the countries of the South? That's also something that we need to reflect on and think about in terms of, you know, the reinforcement, the support, the skilling, the negotiation that we talked about. Everything has its, you know, when we are discussing with some of the representatives of the member states, there are different issues that come up that are also of extreme relevance and importance, and we need to be mindful to that. I will leave it with one, for example, with our high-level committee on South-South cooperation. One of the issues that one time they wanted, you know, to say, let's discuss that, was climate justice, which also brings into play not only the issue of climate from an operational perspective, but it's the justice element. And we go back to the legality of things. So many things to do, but we need to think always about the operationalization. How do we make it happen?
Thank you. Fernando?
I will maybe try to bring the concept of leadership to discussion, because we have a UN director and we have an ambassador from one member state. I think that while the conversation is going at expert level, that is very much focused on the 240 pages and trying to find how the comma will make an impact on the world. I think that is the moment, the right moment for the leadership also to have a different type of discussion, like how we ensure, you know, like what we have in the table is what it is now. It's like how we make this pact meaningful, and which are, this is not a pact that is going to solve the future. And it was never intended to be a pact to solve the future. It was to create a momentum to enhance international cooperation, to try to find solutions that are bringing countries together in areas that we have not done in the past. Sometimes the conversations with the experts go away from that, because you just want to be ensured that your little thing or your big thing is there, even though already there's a lot happening on that area, like climate change. I think that what we need at this stage, especially on the negotiation, is that the leadership from the UN and the member states, they start focusing on what we are going to achieve. Based on this landscape, based on these 240 pages, what are the 10 things that we are going to make difference? And it could go all the way from addressing new challenges to ensure that whatever we agree goes has a proper follow-up. So I think that is the second conversation that we need to try to encourage in the next few months.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm very grateful for your self-restraint in the second part as well. So let's throw it open for a conversation. Julie, should we open it up first to the virtual or on to the? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'm Alex from Carnegie Council with a virtual question. This is from Maya Mele. Apologies if I got that name wrong, pronunciation wrong. So the question is, collaboration is a powerful tool, precisely if practiced through forms of dialogue, where perspectives may expand through the aid of novel outlooks provided through a diverse gathering of member states. Thus, on the topic of including diverse stakeholders, how may youth become involved?
Would anyone like to take that on youth?
I'd be very happy to. So I think it's a really important point. This is the summit of the future. This is the youth's future that we are dealing with, both in terms of the actual pact itself, but also there's a declaration on future generations as well, which goes alongside the pact. And, you know, the classic line of representation, you know, no decision without us. I think it's really important that youth are included. Doing that in a way which is meaningful and not tokenistic. I mean, I've been involved in many summits and processes, and actually finding a way of doing that and involving young people such that they're not just there to sit on a panel and say something and then be ignored, but actually that they're feeding in, I think is something that we need to continue to work hard on. You know, I was the lead negotiator for the Glasgow Climate COP, and ahead of that, we had a youth climate summit in Italy with 400 representatives of young people. But I was also aware how contested that was. And actually, some of the representatives there felt that this was fantastic. This was exactly what was needed. They could engage and they could feed in. And some still felt actually no, because they were put in a position of having to speak for others that they didn't feel comfortable speaking on behalf of. We need to create the right environment where those lessons and those voices are heard, where they're feeding in. We've held events as the UK mission here with civil society and with other groups in order to try to hear what the diverse range of perspectives are. But I'm also sure that there's a lot more that we could be doing. And it's not just youth, it's also learning from indigenous peoples, it's learning from many underrepresented communities around the world, not out of some paternalistic view of needing to listen, but actually because that's where the solutions are, that's where the hope is, that's where the direction and momentum is that can take these break us out of some of our existing kind of dichotomies in multilateral processes and actually open up new avenues.
Please.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Joel and Carnegie Council. My name is George Commander. I'm also a Carnegie Ethics Fellow, but I'm from Sierra Leone, so I'm part of the Global South. But I have two questions, brief one, because all of the panelists spoke about capacity building, you know, leveraging resources, leadership, you know, and also the triangular cooperation, which is really, really fascinating. You know, so my question, you know, hinges on those nexus. So the first question is, how can the Global North, you know, support capacity building efforts in Global South without fostering dependency or undermining local agency and autonomy? You know, my second question hinges on the evolution of technological innovation. So how can we leverage technological innovations to foster meaningful collaboration between countries in the Global North and Global South, particularly in addressing the developmental challenges? Because I think for any conversation we got to have, you know, developmental issues are going to be part and parcel of it, you know, and the summit of the future or the pact of the future, I've been to several of the sessions and all, and I can tell it's really long, you know, every day I've been attending, you know, because I'm also a diplomat. I work at the UN. So, but I just want to just gauge your insight on those two questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Dima, would you like to take that on?
Yes. So on capacity building, let me, if you allow me a few minutes. You know that the UN system is present in almost every country of the South. And part of the, work of the UN system is to work closely at the national level, but also at the regional level with the different national stakeholders depending on the issues related to their country's respective development. So capacity building is very much grounded with the work of the UN system on the ground and at the regional level. We as an Office for South-South Cooperation, we have been providing instruments to enable the country teams on the ground to mainstream South-South cooperation and triangle cooperation within these development cooperation frameworks. So that's something that we have rolled out towards the end of last year. It is coupled with some training and learning that will be initiated, but also in parallel, keeping in our ears and senses with the member states to understand better the needs for the capacity building elements. What was the other question on the technology? So let me also dwell a little bit on this. You know, last year there was a major conference that was held in Cuba, in Havana, by the group of 77, which is the group of the majority of the countries of the South, I think more than 130 countries. And it came out with the whole declaration, Havana Declaration on Science, Technology, and Innovation, and it pinpointed exactly those areas where the countries of the South would require collaboration and would want to foster, you know, technology transfer, exchanges, support to innovation, but also using digital transformation to expedite that process. There was also a whole discussion about the, you know, the vetting and the validation of the different innovations. And this is something that we are also, as an office, trying to push forward through either pilot initiatives, but also through what we are calling right now a development solutions lab, whereby we are trying to also promote the idea of piloting, testing, and incubating ideas that are coming from the South to be able to foster that process. But also, and we were just, you know, before the session talking a little bit about it, we have a network of what we call the global thinkers. And this is a network of think tanks from the South, whereby we're trying to also encourage collaboration among them, encourage working with them on addressing issues of priorities, including technology and innovation, but also amplifying their voice and bringing their voice forward in different forums, you know, and collaboration and collaborative ways. Yeah, was that answer? Yeah.
Ima. Please.
Can you guys hear me? Oh, yeah. My name is Louis. I'm from the Colin Powell School at CCNY. And first, I would like to thank you guys because listening to you gives me some optimistic view of the future. And but when we observe the relationship between North and South, most of the time, as Archie mentioned, those who cause some of the issue are still the beneficiary in some extent. And that reflects this moral theory of Jeremy Bentham of sacrificing a few for a greater number, sadly. But watching on the solution aspect of it, I'm from the Congo. So when on the North we see this issue, we see it as something we can capitalize, you know? We see it as an opportunity. But for people of the Congo, when we face this issue, we see it as 12 millions of people being killed, 6 millions of people being displaced, and then those who are lucky, like myself, a refugee, can grab small boat and come to your majestic and beautiful countries. So my question is, in those processes, is there any solution in that regard? Thank you.
Fernando?
Yeah, well, it's hard to tackle. I think that I will get what you say about solutions. And I think that it's always important when you set any dialogue, any platform that involves countries from the global South, North and global South, that whatever solution is designed in a way that benefits both. And it's okay. I mean, sometimes we had that difficult conversation, how is this beneficial for the UK or for the US? And it's okay if it is beneficial, as long as it's also beneficial to the global South. I think like the biggest mistake that we can take is to think that cooperation is one direction, and it should be one direction. That is kind of a zero-sum kind of approach that benefits no one in the long term. Cooperation is a way to come together, to have difficult discussions, to understand where the other is standing, and it should benefit us both. And I think that is probably some of the mistakes that were made on the past in the framework of cooperation, that it was perceived as North approaching the South from a moral high altitude, and that was the perception from the South, and that create this long-term type of rift between the two regions. I think that what we need to understand is that most of the challenges that we face nowadays are challenges that are across the board, are tackling our populations in the North, in the South, in the East, in the West, In our center, we do some research, and one of the issues that we see, for example, is the problem of housing. And we tend to think, oh, housing is a problem in Buenos Aires, housing is a problem in the Congo or in Sierra Leone. Housing is a problem everywhere. And if we don't find solutions that are long-lasting and address those issues, the consequences that we have in our own societies and in the international level, it's going to be very negative. So yeah, we need to start to be open to learn from each other, wherever we are coming from.
Thank you. Good question. Sorry.
Thank you so much for your time and sharing your insights. I come from Colombia, SIPA, and I'm currently working in a capstone that is designed to, well, we're trying to design the framework on a national dialogue in Global South on the topic of AI. And I have got kind of like a multi-dimensional question to ask. First of all, like on the ethics, like, how like be it like international conflict resolution or in any sort of interventions that we have, there's this kind of notion that like democracy, like countries are gotta be democratized, like in a negative term, like in a sense of like how like we impose our values and to the countries that are not, we have this like cookie cutting approach, like sometimes, not always. And I know there is a shift right now and like people are becoming more tolerant and trying to work on bottom up approach and all that. But like when we talk about AI in specific, right? There is still like this notion of colonization, like, how like global north is obviously like upfront, there's a race, but there's no way global south can catch up at the moment with the digital divide and all the issues. So I really wanted to hear your perspective on that, if it's all right.
Thank
Sorry
you.
for the long question, but hopefully it's helpful.
So I would say there are two issues related to that. One is the digital divide, and the other is the lack of global governance. The digital divide, yes, is a challenge. It's a challenge for AI, but it has been a challenge for technology all across the board. It's not new. I think that there's a lot of initiatives that the UN is working, that member states are working to try to tackle that digital divide, not only because it's good, but because the consequences on advancing, especially the SDGs, and it's huge. The global governance, that is the other area. I feel like a myth buster today, but there's the other area that there's a lot of myth that people don't want regulation, people don't want to. Well, I invite you to read, for example, the positions paper that the private sector is submitting for the negotiations on the Global Digital Compact. Microsoft, Google, they're all asking for regulations. They are companies, so they want regulations that benefit them, but they want regulations. And the same applies from governments. We tend to think, oh, the US doesn't want regulations, the UK or Europe doesn't want, China doesn't want regulation. If you go to read their positions, you see that they feel the need to find a way to enhance the international global governance on digital issues. Different views, yes, but the appetite to have that conversations and the appetite to have an agreement clearly exists. So I think it's with any new technology, it's hard because at the end of the day, the person who is sitting there negotiating is me, is Archie. It's like, I mean, our technology, I don't want to speak for you, but I can speak you how was my technology when I was in school or university. So it's also a challenge for us to be ready as diplomats or to negotiate on the table and negotiate those issues. But as I say, the appetite, the interest is there, which is, the time is needed. And I think that Summit of the Future is giving us a great opportunity to make a step forward on that front as well.
Oh, sorry, can I? Yeah. There is an initiative by the UN Secretary General. It has a senior advisory board putting together a governance framework for AI. And I think that's going to be very, very useful. Sorry.
No, I was going to mention that.
Yeah.
Also, just I think, as you say, this is a very fertile space where people are still trying to work out actually what the right models, plural, look like. We in the UK, we hosted a summit on AI safety at Bletchley Park just at the end of last year, to which the Secretary General attended, and many countries, including a really diverse range of countries, and that was important to us because these issues of AI safety are felt globally. Also, just last week, there was an AI resolution which was adopted at the UN, and there is ongoing work on a global digital compact, which will be another kind of add-on to the Summit of the Future. So these are all examples of different, and deliberately different kind of geometries of trying to tackle this issue. And it's very easy when focusing on them to focus on the risks and how do we manage the risks. But I'm conscious that it can sound too glib and it can sound too naive to say it. But I also think we do need to focus on the opportunities of what digitalization, what AI can do for the SDGs. Now, I must confess, I've been to some conferences on that, which have been frankly pretty empty. And some which have been really, really interesting with practical examples of how these new technological advances can really turbocharge specific aspects of the SDGs and can actually democratize, whether it's on health, whether it's on so many other issues. So I do think there are opportunities there. We just need to make sure we don't get lost in thinking that in that naivety that everything is going to be perfect. And we do need some mechanisms to make sure that this is managed appropriately.
Thank you for your absolute diligent timekeeping. Archie, you mentioned the phrase fertile spaces. I've thought of this council as a fertile space, which leaves with more questions at the end of the discussion than answers. Thank you, Joel, for getting us together. Thank you, Kevin, for organizing all this. Thank you for the wonderful team who's been pushing all this, and we'll be in touch on future programs. We hope to have at least 2 or 3 more this year. Thank you, and Godspeed. Thank you.